Hey everyone, this is the second video that I am making for week 5 of 1303. This one should be shorter than the last one. I just want to give you my more general thoughts on the revision process and how to go about revising your papers. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between editing and revision. What you are not doing right now is editing your rough drafts, because to edit a paper, to me, is to basically say, this is like 90% good to go. I just need to make small little tweaks to like the language, or maybe swap a couple things around just to get it in order. But I'll tell you right, like pretty much no one, just by nature of the course, and this is fine, turned in a rough draft where I feel like you're at the editing stage already. So what we want to be doing is revising. Revising is a more substantial process than editing. When you revise a paper, you are thinking in terms of like, how can I completely restructure this? How can I take out entire chunks of it and add new ones? How can I change what I'm talking about here? And I think that thinking in terms of revision is really important because, like I mentioned, early on in this course, we are thinking of writing as an extension of thought and as a tool to help us think better and more deeply about a subject. And so if you write a first draft and then feel like, well, it's on the page, I don't want to, go through the effort of writing a whole new, 5 pages or whatever, and you stop yourself from thinking further because of that, that to me is the biggest failure, is to stop thinking more deeply and more continuously about something and letting that change both your own thoughts on it and how you write about it. So, keep that in mind, and that's something I'm really going to be looking for as I grade your papers. I'm going to make a third video to give you a little bit more insight into the grading specifically, so I won't be getting into that too much here, but that is definitely something I'm going to be looking for, is how substantially did they revise versus just editing this paper. And as you are revising, I want you to be thinking about thesis still. I mentioned it in the first video that I made for this week, that a lot of your rough drafts either don't quite have any clear thesis yet, or there is a clear thesis, but it's still too general. And that's a very normal and natural part of the writing process. When you first start writing things down, it's really just to kind of organize your thoughts and get you started thinking about something. You're not really required or even supposed to have your like total complete take on it yet. But the reason that drafting is good is you just get your thoughts down, you get them on paper, you see what they look like, you're not trying to keep everything straight in your head anymore, and, it's also easier, of course, for other people to look at it. And a lot of times what you'll find is you'll start writing about something, and you're either dealing mostly in generalities, or you think you have a direction, but as you get feedback or as you look at it yourself, you'll realize, like, I think this is the most interesting part of this. I've got 4 pages here, but there's one point here that really stands out. And I think that's actually what I want to write about. And then you take that and you say, like, okay, this is now my thesis. And you revise the entire thing around that. And that a lot of you did have. You were, say, providing sort of an overview on a major, and giving kind of like background information, but there would be one, even if it's just a single sentence, where you start to get into more specific territory where it's like, okay, that is interesting. If I saw that as a thesis, I would read that whole paper because I'm interested in that like insight or that specific take on it. And until you feel like you have that really interesting thesis with like the so what factor, it's specific, it grabs your reader's attention, your revision, you should really be focusing around the idea of thesis, because it's a way to keep you focused, and it's a way to keep you narrowing the scope of your paper down until the extra stuff is gone. It's not, you're no longer doing the overview. There's not a lot of like, wheel spinning, just kind of trying to figure out what it's saying. You're writing with like real intention then. So keep thesis in your mind as you're revising, and always be thinking of like, what is my thesis here, and is this thesis interesting? The other thing I want to throw in here really quickly, because we just did peer review and you received feedback from other students and from me, is that you are not necessarily required to take anyone's, including my, feedback. And as you continue in your academic careers, you'll often be given feedback from people, whether you want it or not, and you'll have to decide for yourself whether or not to take it. And I want to remind you that it's certainly not required that you make every change someone suggests. What is required is that you are able to justify your decisions both pre and post feedback. You know, you always want to be able to say, well, I did it this way because of this. You want to show intention in your writing. So if I made a suggestion in your paper that to me was fairly critical, you know, like I think you really should do this, and you don't make that change in your final draft, I probably will, you know, email you or contact you in whatever form and kind of say like, hey, let's talk about this. Like, what was your thinking here? And if you can provide me with a solid reasoning for that, that's totally fine. So you don't need to take any individual person's feedback. You do need to be able to justify the intent behind your writing at any given stage in the writing process. You always want to be able to say, I did that for this reason. And then finally, this is just a short point, revise, sorry, there's the difference, revise for content, not for length. If you are focused on finding a solid thesis and a solid argument to make, the length will come, especially because a key part of university writing, just like any other writing, is finding what interests you and excites you about this. And you've probably all had the experience of feeling like a specific topic or, you know, area of discussion wasn't for you until all of a sudden it kind of related to something that's like a real interest or passion of yours. And then it's almost like you can't shut up about it. You know, you just want to keep going because this is like your thing, you know? And academic writing works that same way. You want to get to that point where it's like, oh my gosh, I have so much to say about this. I think about this kind of thing all the time. It's always on my mind. So especially during the revision process, don't be thinking like, I need to hit, you know, 5 pages, whatever. Be thinking, I need to get my thesis statement down. I need to make sure that I have something that's interesting and that I you know, have a lot to say about. And I have found personally in the writing process that once I have a thesis statement down, it almost instantly switches in my mind from like, oh gosh, how am I going to fill, you know, 20 pages about this to like, oh my gosh, how am I going to cut all this down to 20 pages? And you have to like really start getting picky about what you'll include rather than how you'll like stretch things out. So that's the last point. Don't worry about length. Worry about finding something interesting to say, and the length will come, especially because, again, the next video will, I'll talk more about how I'm grading these, but if you're like stalling for time in a paper, I'll know, and I'm not interested in reading that. It's not going to get you the best grade. If you have an interesting thesis and you back it up with evidence, that I will be interested in, and that is what I care more about. All right, so that's the end of this video. I've got one more for you in a little bit, but goodbye for now.